Our story begins in a forest where two seemingly injured military women have wound up at. But there's a fight going on there because the Kawakami Academy, a school that's adopted martial arts, has dictated that any disputes between their classes to be resolved using them in the Kawakami class wars. So as Class S and F kept quarreling, it's led to this, where Class S, commanded by Hideo Kyuki, are engaged in battle with Class F, commanded by the nervous Amakasu. Whoever's side captures the enemy's commander first wins. But Class S has amassed 900 fighters, while Class F only 500. But Class F is in possession of 4 incredibly powerful fighters, as Kazuko Kawakami or Wonko, a master with a naginata, Christina Chris Friedrich, an expert with a rapier, Miyako Shina with mastership over the bow, and Yuki Mayuzumi or Mayuki, an incredibly powerful master swordswoman, with her keychain Matsuke's, who, as she's shy, she sometimes uses to boldly communicate with others, are able to fight entire battalions on their own. But their tactics are thanks to Naoya Yamato, the master tactician in their group. The Kazama family, led by their cap Shoichi Kazama, had chosen to reveal their trump card from the get-go. But there's another girl, who the gray-haired military woman angrily feels nearby. A mighty fighter who's never lost, one of the 4 divas, the 4 strongest young warriors on the planet. The warrior goddess, Momoyo Kawakami. But we see that time ago, Yamato confessed to Momoyo, but she rejected him, reminding him that she was waiting for Prime Minister Yamato. In the present, the fight rages on, but Hideo, prideful and confident of his numbers, ignores his commander's advice and fights head-on against Class F's. But he ended up ambushed thanks to this, with Wonko helping an attack because Yamato knew Hideo would try this. But as Yamato was complimented for his genius, saying that military power isn't everything, he remembered a young Momoyo, asking him to follow her whenever she went. But he wanted to be her equal. But she rejected this because despite his intellect, he was poor at fighting. But he claimed he'd reach her level with his intellect because he wants to become the Prime Minister, which Momoyo laughed at but accepted he'd be at her level if he reached that goal. But in the present, as Yamato's instructing a squad to flank Hideo's vanguard, they couldn't contact them. As we see, they were taken down by the military women. This allowed Hideo to escape, and his forces are now overpowering Class F's, and Amakasu is now being attacked. But she's saved by Mayuchi, who easily deals with their entire squad and has Amakasu deploy a signal. Meanwhile, Kokoro Fushikawa, one of Class F's leaders, instructs to keep attacking, but she sees white flares go off, as she's now warned that part of their troops have betrayed them. Shocked, she decides to attack them, but this leaves her defense thin, which leads to Class F ambushing them. Afraid, Fushikawa tries fleeing, but Chris was waiting for her, all thanks to Yamato's plan. Meanwhile, the fight rages on elsewhere, but Wonko sees that some of Class S are defecting to their side, because the signal had Yamato release a video of himself punishing Fushikawa by spanking her, which demoralized part of Class S warriors enough to make them defect. And with their combined forces, they surround and attack Hideo. But Momoyo interrupts, because she's siding with Hideo, because she thought it'd be more fun this way. But Yamato's also there with Amakasu as well, but it's because they recruited one of the 4 divas and Hideo's sister, Aiga Kyuki, to face her. So Aiga and Mayuki now face Momoyo. But she's too powerful and sleek, freezing and burning their arms. But they're suddenly saved by another of the 4 divas, Tsubei Matsunaga, and with their combined power, they face Momoyo together. While Class S troops engage with S, but even now, S forces are overwhelming against F's. But this doesn't stop Yamato, who charges as his suicide unit, alongside his groupmate, the robot Cookie, who takes into a fighter form. And with Yamato distracting part of them and Cookie taking down some with his energy, it has lead to an opening which allows Class F to surround Hideo, and Cap now faces him. But Momoyo is just skillfully taken down Aiga. But as she's about to deliver the final blow against Matsunaga, the Academy's principal declares the fight's over, because Cap took down Hideo and Class F won the war. Later, Yamato meets with Momoyo, who reveals that he hired Aiga as a present to her because it's her birthday, so she could fight to her heart's content, which she indeed enjoyed. But he also has another present, a ring, claiming that he still loves her, but she hugs him, apologizing because she'd rather he'd still be her underling and her friend as she leaves. Though his friends were seeing this and mock him for it, while the girls also saw this, which leads to Miyako say that it's her chance now, though the rest fluster at this. While we see that the military women have escaped, as the gray-haired one, having seen the 4 divas, angrily crushes a rock. Miyako gets into Yamato's bed and sees he's already so big and tied up. But it's because it's a fake Yamato with a pickle, to her disappointment. Because he's currently in an emergency meeting, asked to recover something important. As later, he talks about this with his group, though Momoyo punishes him for leaving that late. But she's then pissed, because what they're supposed to recover is just a missing dog from their history teacher. But having to hang missing posters, Chris wonders if it's okay, as people could get angered by ruining the town's scenery. But Yamato sees the streets are a mess, making him remember a man, telling him something. Though then, seeing the dog's pictures too blurry, Chris instructs Wonko to track it because she's a dog, which offends her, but she begins smelling it like a dog, and actually finds it in front of them. But as Miyako now tries shooting it to knock it out, the dog takes notice and runs away. So they now chase after it, but it turns out the dog's heavily trained and avoids every one of their attempts across town. Later, meanwhile, in a headquarter, Ahiga is claiming she didn't expect them to make their move while she was busy with a class war, because there, 2 test subjects escaped, as she stares at a tank destroyed by fists. Later at night, the girls all take a bath together, though they fail to recover the dog. But it was actually hiding in the bath. So they all now angrily chase after it, but end up capturing it, but in Yamate's room, who's now seeing them, which makes them beat him up, and the dog escapes again. And later, they chased it to an abandoned factory, where Miyako finally traps it. But they see the factory is filled with illegal weaponry, and are suddenly surrounded by armed men. But the girls take them all down with their skills, as Momoyo demands an explanation. But they're then suddenly attacked by masked ninjas skilled with weapons too. But they shockingly recognize that those techniques are from the Kawakami Academy. But they all suddenly withdraw after hearing a whistle, but leave a grenade behind, which explodes. Though Momoyo saves them by blocking the blast with concrete, though the others went to protect Yamato by covering him. Later, they head back and discuss all this, mentioning that Japan's become quite a dangerous place, which makes Yamato think back on a man who told him he was giving up on Japan. Though, they then realize they forgot the dog, but they suddenly see it's right by them with Cat, who's feeding it, to their shock. But Momoyo still wonders, how did those people know their academy's techniques? Meanwhile, the man who whistled is inspecting the warehouse with the ninjas now off costume, as they plan on selling guns to 2 shadowy figures. Miyako's completely as she's finally conquered by Yamato, but it's just a visual novel, which Miyako made for Yamato, so he finally fall for her after playing it. But Yamato's not moved and just leaves the room to her dismay. The next day, Miyako, seeing Yamato asleep, lies next to him, but suddenly notices his morning wood, making her too excited, which wakes him up and quickly moves, seeing she's jumping on him and kicks her out. Cookie then notices she's failed again, but Miyako won't give up, keen on filling the void in his heart after Momoyo rejected him. But later, when heading to the academy, Momoyo suddenly goes to Yamato, wanting him to be her fighting toy today, and wrestles with him to his dismay. But Miyako watches this and gets sad, as later she talks to Cookie about this, seeing Yamato still acting the same with Momoyo despite being rejected, which frustrates her. But Miyako claims to still love Yamato, because it's thanks to him she's here now, recalling how she was always in elementary school having an awful time. But Yamato sided with her back then and saved her, but you won't turn to her. But Cookie comes up with a plan to disguise himself as a gangster and assault Yamato so Miyako would save him, which make Yamato fall for her. But she instead decides to use her last resort plan, using force. So later, while Yamato tends to his hermit crab pets, Miyako suddenly ties him up, and she, in her begins taking off his belt. But Cookie suddenly barges in dressed like a gangster and saves Yamato instead, because he confused the plans. Though later, Cookie asks Yamato why isn't he responding to Miyako's feelings, but he claims he doesn't have the right to. Because when Miyako was bullied as a kid, he ignored it for a long time in fear of being bullied too. But he ended up helping her because he hated himself for being a coward and didn't want to be guilt-ridden. So he was actually just saving himself. So despite her falling in love with him, he has no right to respond to those feelings, nor should she feel obligated to him too. But Miyako heard all this and hugs him because he thinks so much about her and claiming she loves him, to his dismay. The next day, Mayuchi's taking a bath, but suddenly, Matsuke's calls for a self-reflection session, but on Yamato, because Mayuki has feelings for him. But as she nervously tries denying this, Matsuke reminds her of the day they first met. It was her first day in the academy and she rushed to arrive early, but she bumped into someone and took on a battle pose, which exposed her penis to her dismay. But that someone was Yamato, who kindly handed her Matsuke's after she dropped her. As Mayuki fondly remembers this in the present, but Matsuke claims that as he saw her penis, the only thing she can do is marry him, which Mayuki ends up figuring is true. but doesn't know if Yamato will accept her. But Masakei's, after claiming he'll just end up marrying someone else, motivates Mayuchi to do her best now. But she wants to know what kind of woman Yamato likes, wanting to be like that for him. Which Matsukai's figures is someone like Momoyo, the world's strongest battle maniac, dangerous and violent, and who also easily makes friends. But Mayuchi can't do that because she's incredibly shy, unable to make friends just like that. And after the bath, she runs into Yamato, but she freezes out of nervousness. Though Yamato just says, "Good night, Mayuchi," which she smiles at as she does too, and later goes to sleep as exchanging pleasantries was enough to make her happy. Yamato takes a bath, but Miyako's outside sniffing his dirty clothes, which Yamato catches her doing. But she teases him with her boobs, but he's not having it, though she's now wearing his boxers, and wants him to take them back by force. But Yamato still won't budge, which makes Miyako run from there, but still with his boxers to his dismay. Later, Chris eagerly watches a show about the Japanese value of righteousness, being thankful to her father for having sent her to Japan, while also blushing looking at a picture of herself and Yamato. Later, she goes take a bath but finds Yamato's wallet on the floor, which has a picture of them all, but where he's staring at Momoyo. But he suddenly appears there with his boxers, but are shocked seeing each practically, and Chris steps on his head so he doesn't see. But Yamato tries convincing her that in Japan it was never shameful to see anyone naked, but that Western ideologies contaminated Japan's righteousness, and goes about how the Japan in the past was a peaceful community which was ruined. Chris, though, is buying none of it, while she tries catching her from afar with her rapier, but ends up just cutting it, to her dismay. Though as Yamato still tries convincing her, she claims it's embarrassing to be and it provokes lust. But Yamato calls her a fool for implying lust's vulgar and reveals that he loves looking at naked girls, asking if it's vulgar to feel love. And suddenly asks if she's in love with someone and if that love's a foul urge. Shocked, she claims falling in love is a beautiful feeling, which Yamato tries using to prove his point. But then Chris asks, hypothetically, if someone she knew liked someone else, thinking on Momoyo and Yamato, would it still be righteous to fall in love with him? And at this, he claims that no one should disapprove of her feelings, which Chris finds true, thanking him for clearing her hesitation, but still won't let him see her, angrily stomping on his head now for trying to trick her, and for badmouthing Japan as she claims her dad sent her here because he thought Japan's a wonderful country. But Yamato at this reveals that his father, dismayed at the current state and the direction Japan was heading, abandoned the country and his citizenship. Chris, though, at this, understands they both live with their father's words as absolute and believes that is righteousness, which leads to her talking about Yamato seeing her, asking if he just wants to see anyone naked or it's her in specific, which shocks Yamato as he struggles answering. But Miyako ends up seeing them and gets jealous because she hasn't tried being dominant yet and sits on Yamato's head. The next day, Wanko trains by running with a truck wheel tied to her. But she suddenly hears a dog whistle and runs to it, now seeing it's Yamato, who wanted to show her that Momoyo is being challenged by someone, who she effortlessly takes down to her frustration, so she decides to take it out on Yamato. Though Wanko distracts her with a beautiful girl because she likes them. And though Yamato finds Momoyo's love for girls a bummer, Wanko explains she's just chasing girls because there aren't any guys good enough for her, which frustrates Yamato. Afterwards, Yamato now accompanies Wanko on top of the wheel, though she suddenly asks if he still loves Yamato, which makes him fall off as he nervously explains that he's still her underling despite being rejected. But Wanko says she'd have found it great if they married, to his shock. But it's because that way they'd be family, because Wanko was abandoned by hers, but formed one within the Kawakami temple as Momoyo became her big sister. Though Yamato says he could marry Wanko instead if she wanted a bigger family, which makes her freak out and accidentally hit him with the wheel. Though she later thinks to herself that marrying Yamato sounds exciting. Later, Wanko goes to Momoyo wanting to tell her something, but sees a ring on her hand, so she stops and just exclaims she loves her. Yamato prepares himself to read a very exclusive magazine he's hidden of girls and bloomers, but they all have Miyako's face plastered on them, as well as all his other mags, as he finds her with Cookie gluing her face on all his magazines because she wants to be his fat material. But Yamato, extremely pissed at this, glues her hand to Cookie's head, to their dismay. Later, they head to the academy, but Mayuki suddenly rushes to Yamato as she nervously hands him a boxed lunch. Though Momoyo then arrives, who points out Mayuchi's lunch as he says that Mayuchi does things you'd expect from a girl, unlike a certain someone. But this makes all the other girls suddenly give him food as well, but also the boys, And at this, Momoyo hands him her sandwich, which she bit, letting him have an indirect kiss, which makes him blush, but makes the others jealous as they bite on their foods too, and Cookie ends up also showering him in popcorn. Meanwhile, Fushikawa in the academy sees everyone's happy, but she's told it's because they're mocking her, because she's just finding out of the video Yamato released in the class war, which utterly angers her and decides to start another war. But Hideo rejects this, not needing a rematch against Class F, nor wanting to start a war over something like this. So later, she's dissatisfied, still seeking revenge, and just so happens to run into Yamato, who's talking with the two school, Yanpachi and Ogushi. So she decides to challenge him to a duel, but he doesn't care as he's begging Yanpachi for assistance to remove Miyako's face from his magazines. Because of this, Fushikawa chokes him out of angers, but he suddenly frees himself angered, but has Yanpachi merge his hands with his to pretend he's seeing beneath her skirt, which leads Yanpachi to accept helping him, though Fushikawa is left angered. Later, Fushikawa studies Yamato up and is told to make him angry so he accepts her challenge. So for this, she first decides to harass Momoyo, but ends up scared. And then while Yamato's going to have lunch with his friend's feast, she tries riling him up by showing him king crab dishes because they're related to hermit crabs. But Yamato doesn't see it that way and just leaves. So later, she tries to him, but as he's not caring, she claims she can't call someone who doesn't fall for her a man, which leads to him unzipping his pants, which makes her scream. Angered, she tries hitting him, but he dodges, which makes her trip and cry of frustration. But Yamato suddenly pulls her up, saying she was cute in the way she was before and leaves. But calling her cute has made her fall in love with him. Later, Yamato's finally eating, but Fushikawa approaches him again, now wanting to be his friend. But he's still ignoring her, which makes her hit the table and drop all his food. And though Fushikawa tries treating him to dinner to compensate, thinking this doesn't matter, Yamato tosses her aside and picks the food up, because it's something his friends gave him. But she calls it all junk food. So Yamato accepts her duel. And later, they face each other while Momoyo watches. The combat, which ends when one's knocked out or gives up, then begin. But Fushikawa was easily taking down Yamato repeatedly as he won't give up. But seeing he's getting too injured, she eventually demands him to give up, but he's not satisfied yet. So she beats him up again, but frustrated now. But he stands up again, making her go at it again. But she's now crying, but he won't give up. So Fushikawa ends up apologizing for his lunch as she cries, and Yamato ends up then passing out as Fushikawa is declared the victor. Though she was checked on Yamato, but sees he was wearing armor as he asks if was she worried, which makes her fluster and leave angered. Afterwards, Momoyo carries him home, while the next day, Fushikawa sees everyone serious at the academy now, as she's told her video was deleted and all their copies were asked to be erased. While later, Fushikawa runs into Yamato, who he ends up greeting, though drops his food because of this, as she smiles at him. Yamato prepares for his +18 watching session, but putting the disc on, the TV only shows Miyako as he sees there's a plug cable that leads upstairs, where Miyako's waiting for him to film with her. But he's just pissed as Miyako explains she just wanted to give him a homemade adult video experience. But Yamato leaves and has left Miyako's entire body tied with the cable, as well as cookies. Later, Kat tells his family that for an upcoming festival, they'll carry a palanquin. But Wanko absolutely doesn't want to, because on top of it is a giant because the entire festival is themed after the divine object known as Kanamura-sama, which is a steel which has left Wanko, Chris, and Mayuki shocked. And their giant is shaped after Yamato's. Later, Yanpachi and Ogushi take pictures of the festival, because every girl is eating shaped candies, and Momoyo's inviting these to the girls, which makes them all nervous, besides Miyako. But at this, Yamato explains that in ancient times, men judged women by how well they ate shaped candies and found the most skillful one as the most attractive. The girls are shocked, but decide to go for it, while Momoyo teaches them the proper way of eating them by having them eat it up, which leaves Yanpachi and everyone else stunned. But then, Yamato instructs them to bite it off, which makes every man pass out from the shock as that was her plan all along. Though the girls find out Yamato's left back to their dorm to their frustration, because Cookie broke the tank with his hermit crabs and they escaped. Later, the girls see Akamasu's running a candy stall, but Fushikawa calls their candy a disgrace, comparing her high-quality made one to theirs and mocking them. But this pisses off the entire Kazama family, so Fushikawa is challenged to a duel, which she accepts, but the principal claims they'll have to be decided through battle palanquins, which makes Hideo suddenly appear, with a palanquin with a gigantic phallus shaped after his. And then they both fight with both their phallus. Meanwhile, Yamato rushes back to the festival, but suddenly runs into a man with his face covered of bandages who suddenly punches him. But he apologizes, thinking Yamato was a hitman. But for his resilience and attitude, recognizes Yamato's from the Kawakami Academy as he introduces himself as Neo Yamato. But the man is surprised, because he knows Yamato's father, who he recalls with his caliber, he's the pride of Japan. But Yamato reveals he actually abandoned Japan, having decided it's not worth living in, calling a corrupt nation exploited by corrupt politicians. But the bandaged man calls his dad a loser for this, believing he'd have persevered but instead ran away. But Yamato gets angry at this and demands him to apologize for mocking his dad. But as he won't, he tries hitting him, but he's hit instead, and is told he's the one being mocked. But as he tries repeatedly retaliating, the bandaged man explains that Yamato must have people precious to him, who have precious people, which form families, which form towns, which forms a nation, telling him his father abandoned those precious people. Though Yamato tries saying it's the politician's fault, he's told that people want their nation to be better and don't care who does it, as he leaves and Yamato's left frustrated. Later, Yamato's finally arrived for the fight, and joining his friends, the palanquins clash and they both end up breaking. But at this, Cap decides to become their divine object instead, which Hideo also does, but they see his is a monster. So Class S surrenders. Later, the bandaged man without his bandages gives a report to the Academy's principal, because they're tracking some people down. In a test area, Tank fires at a target, but there's a person there. The gray-haired woman from the class war who destroyed the tank with her fists, and with her insane speed, takes down other tanks, with aid of her companion with a robotic eye. Meanwhile, Momoyo is longing for a challenge, having beaten everyone already. But she remembers she actually didn't beat the ninjas from the warehouse. Though the principal then goes to her room, but she wants to fight him. But as their fight would be too chaotic, he only accepts for 3 seconds, but she wants a longer fight, so she leaves. Though the principal forgot he was there to tell her something important, while the group of girls alongside a man fish at the sea, but it's illegal merchandise what they're fishing. Meanwhile, Yamato reflects on the bandaged man's words, conflicted, while Momoyo runs into and tries approaching him, but suddenly Wanko shows up and takes her to train. Later in their dorm, she's bored, but Yamato then comes in, so she tries talking to him. But Chris interrupts, dragging him to watch her show with him. And later, outside, Yamato runs into Momoyo, but Miyako suddenly hugs him, asking to date her. But as he won't, he basically threatens with revealing his obscenities, so he ends up giving in. Though Momoyo appears frustrated at all this, and while she later chugs down on burgers, she suddenly spots Yamato across the street, so she tries interacting with him, only for him to run into Mayochi, who nervously hands him a lunchbox, and musters up the courage to ask him to eat it, with Matsuke's, which he accepts. So later, Momoyo wonders what's wrong because Yamato's been ignoring her. But suddenly, Yamato runs into her, curious to what she wanted to tell him earlier. But as she won't say, Yamato knows she's pissed and wants to know why. So she reveals he wasn't here. But as he tries explaining it's because of the girls, she directly asks, "Why weren't you here?" Leaving Yamato frustrated. Later, Cap informs his group they've been tasked by the history teacher to track down imported magazines in the academy because they found too many there lately. But as Yamato tries talking to Momoyo, she acts completely cold and just leaves to his confusion. Though later, after taking a walk, Momoyo wonders what the hell is she doing, while Yamato wonders what's up with her. But then Yonpachi approaches him and is offering to sell him a stash of imported porn mags. But Yamato instead demands to know the source, so he reveals it's a red-haired girl in the arcade, which she notices she's being seen, so she leaves. And Yamato follows her, leading him to a harbor. But he ends up caught, and inside his ship, they reveal they're the ones they fought at the warehouse. A group that takes on any job, showing they're smuggling mags as cover for guns. But as their leader tries Yamato, the lights go off and shoots at a candle instead, lighting the ship up. And the girls are now there thanks to Mayochi, who was tracking him down. But Wanko recognizes the man, who then detonates a grenade, but his people manage to escape. But Yamato's did too, as Wanko recognizes he's Jugu Shakado, the former assistant instructor at the Kawakami Temple, who was expelled for having distorted martial arts principles, who was teach his underlings, Amy, Tatsuko, Ryuhei, and Angel, the Kawakami style. And now they face each other. But as Miyako tries protecting Yamato, she suddenly notices he's gone, because Tatsuko's gotten a hold of him, and suddenly kisses him. which distracts all the girls as Shakudo shoots at Miyako from behind. But Yamato quickly makes her notice and dodge, but the bullet now aims for his head. But Momoyo suddenly saves him, and pissed, takes Tatsuko down and then goes after Shakudo. But she's suddenly stopped by the gray-haired girl, who they recognize as a former member of the Four Divas, Teke Tabana, who won't let Momoyo interfere with the plan. But as Momoyo kicks her, she's unscathed, so she tries again with a powerful blast, but she deflects it, as they see her limbs are now metal. Momoyo and Tachibana fight it out, while Shakudo and his group escape, but Tachibana's powers on par with Momoyo's as she actually injures her. But Momoyo, with an instant recovery technique by focusing her life energy on speeding up her metabolism, which instantly heals her injuries, quickly heals up. And as they keep fighting, the girls recognize Tachibana was the fastest of the Four Divas, and fear Momoyo might not win. But as Momoyo wants to know why Tachibana is siding with the villains, she reveals she's one and is also the one who ordered weapons from Shakudo. But suddenly the girls attack her as Miyako stabs her an arrow and Momoyo takes her down, who then goes deal a final blow. The next day, Eiga meets with Momoyo to talk about Tachibana, who time ago, after being defeated by Momoyo and Miyuki, retired from the Four Divas. She was part of the JSDF where she took charge of a classified operation, but Eiga reveals she was killed in it, to Momoyo's shock. As Eiga explains, she's been leading the military division in the Kyuki conglomerate and has noticed that Japan's government is an embarrassment to their soldiers, producing awful equipment, making them suffer in battle. So at this, she decided to develop a weapon. The world's mightiest weapon, which actually helps soldiers, cyborg prosthetics. As we see that when Momoyo was dealing her final blow, Tachibana just fended it off, as Miyako used a non-lethal arrow, while from afar, her companion, Saki Maimori, with an enhanced eye, scans and informs Tachibana that Yamato is their non-warrior strategist. And the girls sense Tachibana's powered up a lot somehow, but regardless, they try attacking again. But Tachibana reads their movements and easily takes them down, managing to also stab Momoyo with an arrow, but she quickly heals and they fight. So the girls now turn to Yamato, who claims there's only one thing they can do, as he has Momoyo create an opening, which she achieves and the girls attack at once, though Tachibana easily fends them off. But they tied grenades onto her, which go off. Back in the present, Eiga explains to Momoyo that these prosthetics were meant for injured soldiers, which give them superhuman strength and return more powerful to battle. So she ordered them to be produced, incorporating the cookie/Kyuki technology into it. And finally reveals that Tachibana was just heavily injured after her operation and was just falsely reported as killed in a training accident. But Eiga found out the truth, retrieved her with her connections, and used her as test subject for the prosthetics because she was dying and it was the only way to save her. And she did, quickly recovering as well and adopting the prosthetics quickly. But her strength was far more than they expected, because of her life energy, as it being at the Four Devas level, alongside the prosthetics' superhuman strength, gave her an unfathomable power. And she ended up escaping, alongside Saki. The same day, Eiga was busy in the class wars, and now she'd been causing trouble for some reason, attacking prototype tanks and the incident at the harbor. So she's asking Momoyo a favor, to stay out of this, because this is a highly political matter. But Momoyo won't accept this because she's determined to defeat her. Meanwhile, Japan's prime minister is being warned that the incident at the harbor involved previous soldiers Tachibana and Saki, and is recommended to deploy the JSDF. But he won't because a public operation would ruin his reputation, so he just sends the police after them. Meanwhile, Momoyo reflects, as we see that when the grenades went off against Tachibana, it caused no damage, and she then electrocuted them. Momoyo, though, stopped it, but suddenly claimed this was incredibly fun, having someone she could finally fight against at full power. But as she went at her, Tachibana began attacking her with bullets and missiles, though Momoyo just instantly healed, and their fight kept raging on, as Momoyo constantly healed up, but then Yamato, barely holding up, tried stopping her, because as she tried healing again, it wasn't working now, as she's reached her limit, but she wasn't having it. But as she deflected missiles from Tachibana, one of them hit Yamato, and in the present, he's now in the hospital, battling for his life, because of Momoyo. Yamato's unconscious, being watched by his friends, worried if he'll make it or not. But suddenly, Wanko begins crying, and reveals that she loves him. The girls are shocked, but suddenly, Chris also confesses her love for him, as Miyuki also claims she holds affection for him. But now, Momoyo reminds Yamato he promised he'd always be with her. But suddenly, his heart stops, leaving everyone frozen and Momoyo crying. But then his heart beats again. And he's now having a making Wanko angrily hit him. Though later, Chris, Wanko, and Mayuki are now nervous, having exposed their true feelings for Yamato in front of everyone. And the worst part is, this has made them see each other as rivals now. And now won't even let any of them see Yamato alone. Afterwards, Yamato's finally woken up as we find out he managed to evade the missile's direct impact, though the blasts still injure him. But is dismayed, thinking on how Tactician easily beat them as if she knew their attacks in advance. But Cookie reveals she did, showing that Tactician's companion, Saki Maimori, got augmentations in her head, which she utilizes to analyze data and must have been sending that data to Tactician. But despite revealing that Ahiga's prohibited them from interfering, Yamato still wants to end this. Meanwhile, Momoyo sees the aftermath of her fight, but Ahiga suddenly shows up, reminding Momoyo to stay out of this, but she wants to avenge Yamato. But Ahiga recriminates her, because Yamato wasn't injured because of Tachibana, but rather by Momoyo herself, having gotten selfishly absorbed in combat. And while Momoyo recognizes this, Ahiga then claims she can't win, because she doesn't have Tachibana's will. But as Momoyo claims to have the will to avenge Yamato, Ahiga doubts it, because she rejected him, afraid of eventually losing his friendship, having ran away from that fight. So ultimately, tells Momoyo to stay out of this, leaving her speechless. And meanwhile, Shakudo is having a pre-celebration with his team because after smuggling guns, their real work begins now. Meanwhile, Yamato's seeing recorded videos of their fight and keeps pondering on the bandaged man and his dad. Though then, Miyako, in inner stress, tries seeing Yamato make. But Chris, Mayuchi, and Wanko follow, with nurse outfits all trying to feed him themselves, as they all fight over it now and end up trying to one-up themselves with who Yamato belongs with, as Wanko tries with him, and he stayed in Chris's room to watch a show. But he also saw Miyuchi's panties, which makes Miyako undress herself at this. But then Cookie suddenly warns Yamato that Tokyo is under assault by Tachibana. But seeing this, all the girls decide to go after her to avenge Yamato. He though tries stopping them, but the pain won't let him. But suddenly the principal comes in, telling Yamato that this will hurt as he strikes at him. Meanwhile in Tokyo, Tachibana and Saki are easily wrecking the armed police because the Prime Minister still won't mobilize the JSDF. But then Momoyo arrives, who demands to know her motives. As Tachibana reveals, she's declaring war against this country. In the hospital, meanwhile, Yamato is suddenly instantly recovered because the principal used a recovery technique on him, though it drastically depleted his own life energy. But he did so because Yamato is the only one whom Momoyo listened to, asking him to help her. As her fight with Tachibana begins, the girls take a train to get to Tokyo when it suddenly stops because they suspended all lines there. But in a phone, they see that Momoyo's there fighting Tachibana, but also see Cookie arriving there with Yamato. Momoyo and Tachibana meanwhile continue their struggle as Saki tries giving her an advantage by analyzing and transmitting Momoyo's movements, while also protecting her from the police. But suddenly, Cookie and Yamato attack Saki, which manages to distract Tachibana, as she remembers Saki and her squad being assaulted by an armed group, when suddenly, a blast went off. In the present, Saki's been captured by Yamato, and see that Momoyo now has the upper hand against Tachibana thanks to this. But as Yamato's reproaching Saki for their destruction, she claims Japan's worthless and not worth protecting. Or rather, they aren't worth it, revealing that they were abandoned by Japan. But as Yamato wants to know what meant by this, she points out, having retrieved all their data, that his dad abandoned this country. As she explains that this country doesn't love individuals, nor is he an exception. And then she swiftly tricks Cookie into cutting her rope and with a kiss, hacks Cookie's arm control, making him slice himself, drop his sword, and fall off the roof, ending up destroyed. And then steals Yamato's weapon, which out of ammo, uses as a bayonet, and goes after him. But he's suddenly saved by the girls who then strike at her. But she reads all their movements and easily deals with all their attacks. But then Yamato comes up with something, as he then suddenly rushes and grabs Saki, and he unzips his pants, and takes out Cookie's sword from it and stabs Suki, electrifying her body. But then we see that back when Tachibana's squad was attacked, she demanded her superiors the right to fight back. But she was denied, and was told to let them go instead. And then a missile exploded mid-air in front of Saki, and Tachibana tried protecting her from it. And in the present, Saki breaks out from Yamato's attack and holds him hostage, having the girls drop their weapons as well, communicating with Tachibana that she's back, who decides to go to her. But as Momoyo chases her, she sees Yamato held hostage. As Tachibana thanks her because thanks to their fight, her plan is closer to fruition. But as Momoyo only cares about taking revenge for Yamato, Saki holds her gun at him. But as Momoyo tries going to him, she's stopped by the girls who won't risk Yamato's life. And Tachibana decides to kill Yamato and shoot them all. But suddenly, a Higa in a stealth chopper falls from the sky and swiftly steals Yamato, and Momoyo takes advantage and holds Suki hostage. But Tachibana won't stop instructing Saki to and shoots at them. But Momoyo lets her go and takes the hits head-on as Tachibana then takes Saki and escapes. And as Momoyo then uses instant recovery, she sees that Yamato is now unconscious. And as the girls all remember their times with him, so does Momoyo, who now demands them to stay away from him, tossing them all away, claiming that Yamato belongs only to her. But suddenly, Matsuke's claims he's just an underling to her, and that they're not even romantically involved. But as Momoyo, pissed, claims that Yamato loves her, she's reminded she turned him down twice. Momoyo's shocked, and Matsuke's keeps going off, saying she's treating Yamato more like a pet by wanting to keep him by her side without responding to his feelings. And it'll be sad for him because he won't actually get love when he needs it, and things will go wrong. But as Mayuki stops Matsuke's, Momoyo's now speechless, because she's decided that from now on, she wants them to treat her like another woman. Having made her decision, Momoyo tries picking Yamato up, but thanks to her choice, they end up now fighting her over this and between each other, and constantly drop Yamato, who ends up wounded later. Afterwards, everyone but Yamato, who's resting, eat lunch together. But the girls are now all wary of each other. And as Cap talks about how Hideo will repair Cookie, Wanko suddenly puts a piece of her food in Yamato's plate, which the other girls also do, repeatedly, only for Momoyo to angrily eat it all. But suddenly, they all decide to go check if Yamato's still asleep and rush to his room, or they suddenly jump on him. But Momoyo clears them up with a blast, only to see it's a fake Yamato with a pickle, as he's outside thinking on Saki and how Japan abandoned them, and on his father, when suddenly the bandaged man approaches him. Meanwhile, the girls are cleaning the mess Momoyo's attack made in Yamato's room, but they end up finding out Yamato's hidden stash, which Momoyo decides to put on the TV. While Yamato talks to the bandaged man who knows the fight Yamato went through, but he wants to know his opinion on Japan, wanting to know what they're fighting for. But seeing Yamato's frustrated, he's told to keep trying when he can, otherwise, he won't be able to forgive himself, saying it's all about self-satisfaction. Yamato at this recalls how he saved someone from back then and thought the same and figures he wanted self-satisfaction, but that he was happy to save her, as the bandaged man calls that type of self-satisfaction justice. And meanwhile, the girls are watching Yamato's. While most are shocked, Momoyo unmoved and Miyako. But as the four of them talk about Yamato repeatedly because of this, Momoyo suddenly breaks his TV, tired of them all talking about Yamato, but they won't give up on him and decide to face her by challenging her to a duel. Meanwhile, Yamato feels a little better after what the bandaged man said, as he's also told whether Japan is worthy or not is irrelevant, being told to just push on as he believes. But suddenly, he receives a call, because Tachibana's broadcasted a video message all across Japan, where she claims she'll destroy the country and kill everyone, especially the Prime Minister. And at this, the Prime Minister finally decides to mobilize the JSDF just to protect him from her. While the girls are now all fighting Momoyo, but at the Prime Minister's office, the JSDF is suddenly faced by a gang of thugs, but their comms are suddenly jammed so they can't retaliate. As we find out, Shakudo paid street delinquents to attack them and had Supi jam their radio, knowing they wouldn't shoot against civilians, as he and his group join the fight. Meanwhile, Yamato sees that the situation's a mess and wonders if all he can do is just stand there, while the girls try their best to take Momoyo down with coordinated attacks. But she ends up injuring Wanko. But she won't give up, because she feels that with Yamato, no matter how hard the training is, she feels she can do it. Why she loves him. While Miyako claims that it's thanks to Yamato she's here now after saving her from being bullied, and Mayuki, who claims that thanks to Yamato she's able to make friends now as he called to her nicely and is becoming less shy. While Chris, knowing Yamato would do anything to protect his friends, has seen true righteousness and has decided to follow him. And Momoyo claims that she's always depended on Yamato's kindness, saying he's always been with her and was fun watching this, wishing it'd last forever, and got happy when Yamato confessed. But she was also scared that it'd ruin their friendship. And after she distanced herself from him while they all got close to him, she finally realized that she loved Yamato. But as they all claim they won't lose, Yamato suddenly appears there, who claims that he wants to protect this country because this is where the people he loves live. At this, Momoyo decides to join him. because he won't become prime minister and be her equal if the nation's destroyed, while the rest of the Kazama family joins in as well. The Kazama family arrives on the scene and begins fighting the delinquents and Shakido's gang, while Tachibana faces Momoyo and Saki faces Yamato. The battle rages on when suddenly Tachibana counters one of Momoyo's attacks, piercing through the prime minister's office to the bottom floor, and Saki, calling Japan worthless again, takes down Yamato. And seeing her friends busy, she goes to Tachibana. But Yamato claims it's not worthless, as he remembers his dad giving up on Japan, claiming it has no future, because he couldn't freely express his love for anything in it, as everyone calls it complexes, and would be looked at with disdain if he said he loved this country. A country where one's unable to tell anyone what they consider precious, a country with no future. Meanwhile, the prime minister's suddenly approached by the bandaged man, who reveals his face as he's surprisingly recognized, and who also knows of his scheme, recalling that the prime minister made a plan bringing in an illegal unit for a scheme to reach the top of the nation uncontested, which worked. But they first landed at the wrong spot, and the JSDF sent in Tachibana's unit, who, thinking they were betrayed, were attacked by them. And while Momoyo's facing Tachibana, Ahiga suddenly shows up, but she demands on knowing Tachibana's true objective, because the tanks she destroyed beforehand, she deliberately targeted weak points and left the crewmen alive, as well as leaving no casualties in all her attacks so far, because she knows her goal isn't destruction, but rather to act as a villain to Japan. Because, as Japan doesn't have enemies right now, no one respects the soldiers, while it changed with her. Though Tachibana claims she's just a warrior who put her nation first, but found out that was all just for a worthless man's ambition instead, finding it painful having soldiers die just for him. And while they devoted their lives to their nation, she wanted the nation to cherish them back, but claims it was just fantasy if she flies off. Meanwhile, the fight between the Kazama family and the delinquents rages on, while Yamato keeps reminiscing on his dad, thinking on how he asked him if he'd still want to live in Japan if he left. And looking at his friends, he claimed he would. But Yamato asked if he'd come back once it became a country where one can confidently reveal their love. As Yamato says, he'll become the prime minister one day to achieve that. And his dad said he would. And remembering this, Yamato tries to keep fighting, but his swords ran out of energy. But then the history teacher's dog saves him, as Hideo's joining the fight with Class S and Cookie, fully repaired. And when Shakido and his gang face the girls, Yamato appears, asking them to not die. But they claim he's got this wrong, because as their enemies sacrifice their allies, Yamato must tell them to die for him so they can win. But claiming that it'd make them the same as them, Momoyo appears with a Higa, calling him knave, because every martial artist should be ready to fight, so he'd be ready to order her death. So at this, Yamato asks them to die for him. But they won't, because they'll live and win for him. Which he expected they'd say that, as they all then fight Shakido's gang, as they actually have the upper hand now, and Matsunaga also arrives. But seeing this, Shakido decides to escape. Meanwhile, the unbandaged man reveals to the prime minister that he's done for, because their entire conversation was live recorded by him, with his watch, as he then easily takes him down. Momoyo, meanwhile, fights Tachibana again, but her life energy's running out. But Tachibana's is too. And while Yamato spots Saki, Cookie takes on an upgraded form of a giant mecha. So Yamato pilots him and goes after Saki, who directs missiles at him, but he still makes it to her and takes her down. While Momoyo, without Saki's help, finally manages to defeat Tachibana. But she's also done for, stabbed in the heart. And as Yamato arrives, she says goodbye to him, but reveals that she wanted to accept his confession, and that she loves him. As she closes her eyes, everyone's left heartbroken, as Yamato thanks her and gives her a kiss. But then she suddenly wakes up and expels the shard from her chest, because his kiss recovered her life energy. But claiming she's the true victor thanks to this, it reminds Yamato he said he fick for his loved ones, asking who did he mean by that. But he claims he meant his hermit crabs, because he loves them so much he can't stand it, which makes the girls pissed at him, as they all demand him to seriously fall in love with me. Afterwards, Ahiga's decided to take over Tachibana and Suki, while Shakido's receiving his payment, but suddenly throws his cigarette into a dynamite box, which blows up.